In the heart of the city stood a towering building, gleaming with luxury and a sense of exclusivity. It was home to one of the most successful companies in the industry, known for its high-end clients, expensive deals, and reputation for power. The offices on the upper floors held the company's executives, those who lived lives of privilege, while the lower floors were where the janitors and support staff worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Max, a 16-year-old boy, worked in this very building as one of its janitors. His life was far from glamorous. After school, he would don his uniform, a simple blue jumpsuit, and spend long hours scrubbing floors, cleaning bathrooms, and dusting the high-rise offices. Max was a quiet teen, humble, polite, and friendly with the few coworkers he had. He never sought attention and made no attempt to stand out. His job was simple: make sure everything stayed clean and presentable for the important people who worked above him. The high-powered executives and their children hardly noticed Max, if at all. He was just another invisible face among the cleaning staff. To them, he was a nobody, a mere fixture of the building, doing his job without question. But Max never minded. He was used to being overlooked, content with the small, humble life he led, even if it meant being forgotten in the shadows of the company's glittering success. Ethan was everything Max was not. At 16, he was the spoiled son of the CEO, a young man with an air of entitlement that radiated wherever he went. His family's wealth and status were a constant source of pride for him, and he took full advantage of the luxuries that came with his position. He attended the best private schools, wore designer clothes, and had a sense of superiority over everyone else. Ethan would often roam the halls of the company, strutting with the confidence that only privilege could bring. And whenever he crossed paths with Max, his behavior became even more evident. To Ethan, Max was nothing more than a lowly janitor, someone who was meant to clean up after others, not to be seen or heard. The young heir would make snide comments about Max's uniform, call him names under his breath, and sometimes even laugh at him in front of others. "Better not get any of that grime on the carpet," he would sneer, as Max pushed his mop across the polished floor, or with a smirk, he'd say, "Do you really think this is all you're meant to do with your life?" Max, though deeply hurt, never responded. He'd simply keep his head down and continue working, silently enduring Ethan's taunts. To Max, proving himself through hard work and perseverance mattered more than the cruelty of someone who didn't understand what real struggle was. Max's days followed a predictable rhythm. After school, he would clock in and spend the next several hours cleaning the office building. He polished glass windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, mopped the cold marble floors, and scrubbed away the grime in the bathrooms, all while others, high-powered executives, businessmen, and important clients, came and went through the building. They passed by him without a second glance, wrapped up in their own worlds of power and prestige. To them, Max was just another invisible worker, nothing more than a fixture in the background. But Ethan saw him. And the more Max stayed invisible to everyone else, the more Ethan seemed to make it his personal mission to remind Max of his place. As the days went by, Ethan's behavior only grew more cruel. He began calling Max the cleaner with a sneer every time they crossed paths, sometimes even loudly mocking him in front of the other staff. During lunch breaks, when the employees would gather in the cafeteria, Ethan would throw food at Max: salads, pieces of bread, sometimes even a drink or two. It was as though making Max feel small was his new hobby. Max's face would flush with embarrassment each time, but he never retaliated. He simply wiped away the mess and kept his eyes low, ignoring the sting of humiliation. He had learned that responding to Ethan's cruelty would only make things worse, and he refused to give in to the anger he felt. Instead, he stayed focused on his work, knowing that one day his life would be different. At the same time, Max grew closer to the other janitors and support staff, who admired him for his hard work and calm demeanor despite the bullying. They saw him as more than just a janitor. They saw him as someone who had dignity and respect. Max often dreamed of a life where he wouldn't have to stay invisible, where he could stand tall among the people who once looked down on him. But changes were coming. Rumors began circulating in the building that the CEO, Max's father's old boss, was getting older. He had started talking about retirement, and there was an undercurrent of tension among the employees. Whispers about who would take over the company filled the halls, but nobody truly knew what would happen next. Max's quiet life, one marked by hard work and the constant hum of the building he cleaned, hid a secret that nobody knew, not even Ethan, who thought he had Max all figured out. The truth was, Max wasn't just a janitor, he had a far deeper connection to the company than anyone could have guessed. Years ago, before Max had even thought about becoming a janitor, his mother had been one of the most respected figures at the company. She was a brilliant businesswoman, known for her strategic mind and her ability to close deals that pushed the company to new heights. She worked directly alongside the CEO, a partnership that everyone admired. Max's mother was loved by everyone who knew her. She wasn't just a successful woman in a man's world, she was a mentor, a friend, and a force to be reckoned with. But then, tragedy struck. Max's mother was killed in a car accident, a loss that devastated him and shattered his family. His father, once an executive in the company, fell into a deep depression. Unable to cope with the grief, he disappeared, leaving Max to fend for himself. Max chose to keep his family's past hidden. He feared that if anyone found out who his mother had been, he would be treated as a target, a person to be manipulated, rather than someone deserving of respect. What no one knew, not even the CEO, was that Max's mother had arranged for him to inherit the company she had helped build. Before her death, she had quietly ensured that Max would take her place one day, setting aside the legal documents that would transfer ownership of the company to him when the time was right. These documents had been kept hidden, away from prying eyes, tucked in a place no one knew about. Max had no intention of claiming his inheritance when he first took the job as a janitor. He never wanted the limelight. He wanted to work hard, live humbly, and avoid the drama of his family's legacy. But now, with the CEO's impending retirement and the future of the company uncertain, Max knew that the time had come. It was time to step forward, claim what was rightfully his, and show everyone, including Ethan, that he was not just the invisible janitor they had all ignored. The day the CEO announced his retirement, the atmosphere in the building shifted. The company, once a well-oiled machine, running smoothly with the CEO at the helm, suddenly felt like it was on the edge of a cliff. The CEO, who had built the company from the ground up, had made the decision to step down, and with that came the inevitable question: who would take his place? The rumors began circulating almost immediately. Employees whispered in the hallways, speculating about who would be the next leader. Ethan, with his sense of entitlement, was quick to position himself as the obvious successor. After all, he was the CEO's son, and many in the company expected that the role would naturally fall to him. Ethan walked with a newfound swagger, his confidence growing by the day. To him, the job was as good as his. He had always assumed that once his father retired, the company would be his to control, but there was a growing sense of unease in the air. Ethan's overconfidence rubbed some of the staff the wrong way, and it became clear that not everyone shared his certainty about the future. Still, Ethan's attitude didn't change. He began treating Max even worse than before, sensing that Max, with his janitor's uniform, would never stand a chance at taking the top spot. Ethan mocked Max even more openly, calling him just a cleaner and making sarcastic remarks about how he would never be in the running to lead anything. Max, however, was no fool. He knew exactly what was coming. The documents were in the process of being finalized. His mother's legal papers, carefully hidden and unknown to anyone in the company, were now almost ready to be revealed. The time was drawing near. As Max worked tirelessly, a change was evident to the other staff. He had become more distant, his usual polite demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. He focused on his work with a newfound dedication, almost as though he were preparing for something far greater than the daily tasks of cleaning. Whispers started to spread among the janitors and other employees. They began to wonder if there was more to Max than they had ever realized, if perhaps he wasn't just the invisible janitor after all. The air in the office was thick with anticipation. It was the day the CEO had planned to announce his retirement officially, and there were rumors of a special meeting being called. The staff, dressed in their business attire, filled the conference room, their murmurs quieting as they waited for the meeting to begin. Ethan, as usual, stood near the front, his posture oozing arrogance. He had no doubt in his mind that today would be the beginning of his reign as the next CEO. His confidence was so palpable that it seemed almost certain. But then, the doors to the conference room swung open, and the room fell silent. Max walked in, but this time, he was not in his usual janitor's uniform. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, the kind worn by the company's most important executives. His presence was striking, and the contrast between his new appearance and the man everyone thought they knew was impossible to ignore. For a moment, the room seemed frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. Max stood at the front of the room, his calm demeanor unchanged, but the gravity of his presence sent a ripple through the crowd. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice steady and clear. I called this meeting because there's something you all need to know. Max began, locking eyes with the staff, then finally turning his gaze to Ethan, who stood frozen, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. I am the rightful heir to this company. This is mine, by my mother's will. Max continued, the words dropping like bombs in the otherwise quiet room. The room erupted into a chorus of shocked whispers. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and even Ethan's usually composed face faltered. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The arrogance that had once defined him crumbled in an instant as the realization dawned on him that he was no longer the top contender for the CEO position. His confidence turned to doubt. Max paused, letting the news sink in. He then began to explain his reasons. My mother was an integral part of this company, a skilled businesswoman who worked beside the CEO. She made sure that I would inherit everything she had worked for. But after her death, I chose to keep that part of my life hidden. I didn't want to be seen as a privileged heir. I wanted to work for what I had. I wanted to prove myself, even if that meant being overlooked and disrespected. Some of the staff reacted with admiration, nodding in understanding at Max's decision to keep his inheritance a secret. Others, however, remained in stunned silence, still unable to process the revelation. Ethan, still struggling to comprehend the situation, stood there, utterly speechless. The room had shifted in an instant. The young man who had been mocked and dismissed was now the one in charge, and no one could ignore the fact that he had earned his place. Max's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. And as the reality of his words sank in, the question now was not who would take over the company, but how Max would lead them all into the future. Ethan's world had been turned upside down. The sudden realization that the company, which he had assumed would one day be his by birthright, was no longer in his grasp, left him feeling humiliated and betrayed. For years he had lived with the belief that his last name was enough to secure his future. Now Max stood before him, quiet, composed, and suddenly the rightful heir to everything Ethan had always thought would be his. Unable to contain his frustration, Ethan sought out Max later that day, cornering him in an empty hallway. His face was flushed with anger, and his usual arrogance had given way to a desperate, wounded pride. You don't deserve this. Ethan spat, his voice trembling. You're just a janitor. You've spent your life cleaning up after people like me. How could you possibly run this company? You're not even qualified. Max stood calmly, his gaze unwavering, as Ethan ranted. He wasn't shaken by the accusations, nor was he angry. He simply took a deep breath before responding. Being born into wealth doesn't define a person's worth, Ethan, Max said quietly. It doesn't make you a leader, and it certainly doesn't make you capable of running a company. Leadership is about more than your name, it's about the work you put in, the integrity you have, and the respect you earn. You have a chance to prove you're capable of more than just being the CEO's son. But right now, your arrogance is holding you back. Ethan's face twisted with frustration. He had always been the one in control, and now he was losing everything. Still, he wasn't ready to let go. In a last-ditch effort, he tried to rally the staff. He began speaking to the employees, attempting to convince them that he was the right choice, that he had the experience and the connections to lead them forward. But his words fell flat. The employees, many of whom had witnessed his arrogance and entitlement over the years, were no longer impressed. The respect they once had for Ethan had evaporated, replaced with a growing sense of disillusionment. Max, meanwhile, remained composed, watching the situation unfold. He didn't need to seek revenge or prove anything to Ethan. His goal was clear: he wanted to lead the company with integrity, to bring real change to a place that had once been defined by power struggles and privilege. While the tension between the two grew, Max remained steady, knowing that in the end, it wasn't about proving Ethan wrong. It was about proving that true leadership comes from character, not entitlement. After much deliberation, the board of directors and the staff, who had witnessed the intense shift in dynamics, overwhelmingly voted in favor of Max becoming the new CEO. It wasn't an easy decision for some. Old habits die hard, and many had once believed Ethan was the logical successor. But as time passed, it became clear that Max's quiet strength, his dedication, and his vision for the company were exactly what it needed to move forward. Max's first day as the CEO was a mixture of nervousness and triumph. Standing in front of the same employees who had once ignored him, who had mocked him, was no small feat. But now, as their leader, Max felt the weight of his new position settle in. With a deep breath, he addressed the company, his voice steady, though a flicker of emotion remained. "I know many of you thought I was just another janitor, someone who would remain invisible in this company forever." Max began, "But today I'm here to show you that leadership isn't about who you were born to be, it's about what you stand for, how you work, and how you treat others. I promise to lead with honesty, hard work, and respect for everyone, no matter your role in this company." He paused, letting his words resonate. This company isn't just about profits or prestige, it's about the people who make it what it is. And I will make sure that every voice is heard, every contribution valued. The room was silent for a moment before it erupted into applause. Max had won them over, not because of his inheritance, but because of his heart, his integrity, and his commitment to changing the culture of the company. Meanwhile, Ethan, who had been standing at the back of the room, was left to reflect on his own actions. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that being born into privilege didn't automatically make him a leader. The qualities that made Max the better choice, his humility, his work ethic, his respect for others, were the ones Ethan had never understood. It was clear now that he had been blinded by his own arrogance. Max's journey from janitor to CEO was now complete. He had proven that true leadership comes from within, not from wealth or privilege. And as he looked out at his team, Max knew that his story wasn't just about becoming the CEO, it was about showing everyone that no matter where a person starts, with hard work and humility, they can change their destiny.